Imagine waking up one morning to the sound of an engine you don't recognize idling just outside your bedroom window. At first, you brush it off. After all, cars come and go in any neighborhood, but this one isn't leaving. It lingers. And soon, so do the questions. Why is that faded gray sedan parked outside the cul-de-sac day after day? Who owns it? Why no one ever step out? That's where it all began for me. An ordinary street with white picket fences, freshly trimmed lawns, and the kind of silence that made you believe you lived in the safest corner of the city. I'm Mark Daniels, 42, a construction supervisor, father of two, and someone who thought I'd finally built a peaceful life in a neighborhood worth protecting. But that morning marked the start of something that would unravel every assumption I had about control, privacy, and what it really means to belong in a community run by a homeowners association. The car wasn't mine. I want to make that clear from the beginning. It wasn't my neighbor's either, at least not anyone I knew. It was a silver Toyota Camry, scratched along the passenger side, tinted windows rolled up tight, and a layer of dust beginning to settle on the hood. It sat there, quiet, unassuming, but somehow out of place. And in neighborhoods like mine, out of place is a crime in itself. Enter Karen Mitchell, 56 years old, president of the HOA board, and the self-appointed sheriff of Maplewood Estates. You know the type, every blade of grass measured against her idea of perfection, every mailbox checked for regulation paint color. Karen lived across the street from me, in a house that gleamed like it had never been touched by human life. She wasn't cruel at first glance, at least not openly, but she had that smile. The kind that looked like it was constantly hiding a threat behind it. The day the car appeared, Karen noticed. She always noticed. And it wasn't long before whispers started circulating at the block party, in the HOA Facebook group, and even in casual greetings at the mailbox. Who left that car? Why hasn't it moved? 2 days turned into 5. 5 into 10. And by the second week, Karen had already branded it with a scarlet letter, abandoned. At the next HOA meeting, she made her stand. I can still hear the shrill ring of her voice cutting through the room. This is Maplewood Estates, not a junkyard. We have worked too hard to let property values sink because someone decided to dump an old clunker in front of our homes. If the owner doesn't come forward by Friday, I'll personally make sure it's reported and towed. The room nodded, most people too tired or too indifferent to argue. But something about the way she said it, the absolute certainty, the pride in her power, made my stomach twist. She wasn't just complaining about a car. She was laying claim to the street itself, to every one of us, and drawing a line between those who obeyed and those who didn't. I didn't care about the car at first. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than it seemed. There were no parking tickets under the wiper. No flyers. No notes from Karen taped angrily to the windshield, which was strange because she did that to everything. And late at night, when I walked the dog, I could have sworn I saw the faint glow of a laptop screen flickering behind that tinted glass. By the third week, Karen made good on her threat. She filed an official complaint with the city. She called a tow company. She bragged about it in the HOA newsletter, under a section she titled, "Keeping Maplewood Beautiful." Her words felt less like concern and more like conquest. And then came the moment that changed everything. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was home early from work, hammers still dusted with sawdust, when I heard the metallic crunch of a tow truck's chains rattling outside. Curious, I stepped out. There was Karen, arms crossed, lips pursed like she was presiding over a trial. The tow driver hooked the car, lifting it slowly. And that's when 2 men in plain clothes, hidden until that very moment, stepped out of the vehicle. Guns drawn. Badges flashing. "Federal Task Force," one barked. "Step back." Karen's face drained of color as the realization sank in. The car she'd been so desperate to remove wasn't abandoned at all. It was bait. A surveillance van disguised as a beat-up Camry, watching something, or someone, within our quiet little slice of suburbia. And as the chaos unfolded, one question hotter than all the others in my mind. How much power should an HOA really have over the lives of the people it governs? Because Karen hadn't just meddled in neighborhood appearances. She had interfered with law enforcement. And in that moment, I knew that what began as a petty complaint was about to spiral into a war, one that would shatter the fragile peace of Maplewood Estates forever. When the agent stepped out of that silver Camry, guns leveled and badges flashing, Maplewood Estates froze in time. It was as if the entire neighborhood had been caught committing a crime. Kids stopped their bikes in the street, sprinklers clicked and spun unattended, and every face behind every curtain stared out in disbelief. Karen Mitchell, the self-crowned queen of our neighborhood, stood there trembling, her voice cracking for the first time since I'd known her. "I didn't know," she stammered. "It looked abandoned." But that excuse didn't matter. The damage had been done. She had filed reports. She had demanded action. She had put herself, and all of us, squarely in the way of something bigger than any of us understood. The federal agents weren't there to explain themselves. They made that clear immediately. One of them, a tall man with a shaved head and a hard stare, looked directly at Karen and said, "Next time you interfere with an operation, you won't just be facing an HOA complaint. You'll be facing federal obstruction charges." Then, without another word, they climbed back inside the car, slammed the doors shut, and the engine roared back to life. The Camry remained, chains unhooked, settled again like it had never been touched. From that moment, the car wasn't just a curiosity. It was a line in the sand. The next HOA meeting should have been about landscaping updates and holiday decorations, but instead, it became a battlefield. Karen tried to spin the story, of course. She always did. She insisted that she was acting in the best interest of the community. She claimed she was protecting property values, keeping the neighborhood safe from blight and trespassers. But something had shifted. For the first time, people weren't nodding along. People weren't smiling politely. They were whispering, exchanging glances, questioning. Because what happened in front of our homes wasn't just embarrassing, it was terrifying. It exposed the hidden problem that no one wanted to say out loud. Our HOA had stopped being about community. It had become about control. You see, HOAs always start with a promise. They promise neat streets, rising home values, and a shared sense of pride. But underneath, there's always a hunger. Power collected in small doses, written into bylaws and rules that sound harmless at first. No boats in the driveway, lawns must be mowed weekly, trash cans hidden by sundown. Each rule seems reasonable, even helpful, until they're weaponized by someone like Karen. And Karen thrived on those rules. She carried a binder filled with them, an actual leather binder that she brought to every meeting, every confrontation. She could cite page numbers, subclauses, fines, and precedents like a seasoned lawyer. She wasn't enforcing the rules for the sake of beauty. She was enforcing them to remind us that she could. The car incident peeled back the mask. It wasn't about keeping Maplewood beautiful. It was about Karen's pride, her dominance, her need to bend the neighborhood into her vision of perfection. And when she called that tow truck, she wasn't thinking about national security, or surveillance, or even safety. She was thinking about her control. About proving she could remove anything, anyone, that didn't fit. That realization sank deep into all of us. My neighbor, James Alvarez, 38, an accountant and father of 3, spoke up for the first time in a meeting I'd ever seen. His voice was shaky, but it carried weight. "Karen, you could have gotten us all hurt. Do you understand that? You don't know what that car was here for, who they were watching. You called the city. You called a tow. What if the agents thought we were interfering?" Karen shot back, her smile tight and venomous. "I was doing my duty as president of this HOA. If we let things slide, we'll end up like the neighborhoods down the highway. Overrun. Unsafe." "Unsafe?" James pressed. "You made it unsafe. You invited danger right to our doorstep." That room, usually full of mild sighs and forced smiles, buzzed with something else that night. Dissent. A crack had formed in Karen's iron grip. And once people saw the crack, they couldn't unsee it. But the hidden problem wasn't just Karen. It was us. We had allowed it. We had signed the documents at closing, agreeing to abide by the HOA's rules without reading the fine print. We had shrugged when she barked at us about trash bins. We had grumbled but complied when she fined us for weeds or holiday decorations that overstayed their welcome. We thought it was easier to stay quiet, to let her have her way. But silence had given her power. And now, that power had put us all in the crosshairs of something we never asked to be part of. The car stayed, of course. It was never moved. Every day it sat there, as though mocking us, reminding us that something bigger than our HOA battles was unfolding right under our noses. But for us, the real battle had already begun. Neighbors began taking sides. Some argued Karen had only done what she thought was right, that no one could have expected the car to be federal. Others said it was proof the HOA had gone too far, that Karen's reign needed to end before it dragged us all down with it. Whispers became arguments. Arguments became shouting matches. And by the end of that month, you couldn't walk down Maplewood Lane without feeling the tension crawling across your skin. The car was no longer just a car. It was a mirror. It forced us to look at the truth we'd all ignored. The HOA wasn't protecting us. It was dividing us. And deep down, I realized something else too. If one complaint about a car could fracture an entire neighborhood, what would happen when the next dispute came? What would happen when Karen turned her attention from vehicles to fences, from fences to families, from families to me? Because in Maplewood Estates, it wasn't a matter of if. It was only a matter of when. The silver Camry stayed. Day after day, week after week, it remained in its spot like a sentinel. To the untrained eye, it was nothing more than an old, dusty car. But to us, it had become a symbol. And like all symbols, it carried more weight than it should have, dragging our community deeper into conflict with every passing sunrise. At first, people tried to move on. Parents still walked their kids to the bus stop, sprinklers still clicked on at dawn, and lawnmowers still hummed on Saturdays. But beneath that suburban rhythm was something darker. Every conversation seemed to circle back to the car, to Karen, to what had happened that day with the agents. The real consequence wasn't the car itself. It was the division it created. One morning, I saw my neighbor Clara Jenkins, 61, retired schoolteacher, arguing with James Alvarez in her driveway. Clara had always been one of Karen's closest allies, the kind of person who called herself a stickler for order. She believed in rules, and she believed in Karen. She did what any good president would do. Clara snapped, her voice rising over the chirp of morning crickets. That car was lowering the look of the street. You think buyers want to see an old junker parked out front? You should be thanking Karen for protecting your property value. James, usually calm, shook his head in disbelief. Clara, are you hearing yourself? That wasn't an abandoned car. It was a surveillance vehicle. She interfered with federal agents. She could have gotten us in serious trouble. Their voices carried across the cul-de-sac. Curtains twitched. Neighbors peeked out but didn't intervene. Because the truth was, most of them were already choosing sides. That was the unseen consequence of Karen's crusade. The community began to fracture like glass under pressure. Cookouts stopped happening. The neighborhood book club dissolved. Parents who once waved at each other while walking their kids now crossed the street in silence. Trust evaporated, replaced by suspicion. The HOA meetings, once dull and predictable, became battlegrounds. People shouted over each other. Fists slammed on tables. At one meeting, Karen accused James of inciting division, while James accused Karen of abusing power. The room split into two camps, those loyal to Karen and those who wanted her gone. And in the middle of it all was me, watching, listening, feeling the air grow heavier each day. The paranoia spread like wildfire. Some neighbors whispered that the surveillance van was there because of drugs. Others claimed it was about a terrorist cell. One rumor said they were watching Karen herself, that her constant meddling had finally drawn the wrong kind of attention. Every theory, no matter how absurd, carried a seed of fear. And in a neighborhood already on edge, fear became fuel. I started noticing changes in people's behavior. Clara installed security cameras on every corner of her house, red lights blinking all night long. James began checking his mail at odd hours, as if he didn't want to be seen outside. Families stopped letting their kids play in the street. And then came the retaliation. Karen, humiliated but not broken, doubled down. She began issuing more fines than ever, grass too long, trash cans left out, basketball hoops in driveways. It felt like punishment, like she was reminding us she still had power even after her mistake. I received one of those fines myself. A letter slid into my mailbox, citing a violation, improper placement of recycling bins. $50. $50 because my bin sat 2 inches beyond the designated area behind my fence. I stared at that letter for a long time. My fists clenched. My chest burned. Because it wasn't about the bin, it was about control. She was sending a message: I still run this place. That night, as I crumpled the letter in my hand, I looked across the street and saw the Camry still sitting there, quiet, unyielding. And it hit me, Karen wasn't the only one watching us. We were all being watched. By the car. By the agents inside. By each other. The neighborhood had turned into a cage. The ripple effects spread beyond Maplewood Estates. I started overhearing whispers at work. A coworker asked if I lived in that HOA neighborhood with the FBI car. News had leaked somehow. People outside our gates knew. Now it came down to this night. Would Maplewood Estates remain under her reign, or would we finally break free? James leaned toward me, his voice low. No matter what happens, Mark, we started something bigger than her. She can't erase that. He was right. Even if Karen won, even if fear prevailed, the silence was gone. The neighborhood had found its voice. The voting began. One by one, people lined up, marked their ballots, and slid them into the box. Some walked past Karen without meeting her eyes. Others gave her defiant glares, small acts of rebellion. Clara Jenkins, loyal to Karen until the bitter end, patted her on the shoulder as if reassuring a queen before battle. When the last ballot dropped, the room went still. The only sound was the faint shuffle of paper as the committee counted behind a folding table. Every second dragged. My palms were damp. My heart thudded against my ribs like a war drum. Finally, the head of the committee cleared his throat. By a vote of 47 to 26, Karen Mitchell is hereby removed as president of the Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association. For a moment, silence. And then applause. Shouts. Neighbors hugging, clapping, releasing months of pent-up fear and anger in a flood of relief. Karen didn't stand right away. She sat frozen, her eyes wide, binders still clutched in her hands. Then slowly she rose, her voice sharp and shaking. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "Without me, this neighborhood will fall apart. You think you want freedom, but you need order. Without rules, without control, chaos will swallow you." But her words no longer held weight. They hung in the air like smoke, quickly dispersed by the roar of voices that no longer feared her. For the first time, Karen Mitchell had no power here. She left the room without another word, binder pressed to her chest, her heels clicking a retreat. The door slammed behind her, and just like that, Maplewood Estates was free. But freedom isn't the same as peace. The weeks that followed were strange. The surveillance car vanished one morning without explanation, leaving behind nothing but tire tracks and 1,000 unanswered questions. The agents never came back. Whatever they were watching for had ended, or moved somewhere else. Without the car, the tension eased, but scars remained. Neighbors who had shouted at each other across lawns still avoided eye contact. Families who had taken sides struggled to forgive. And in the quiet moments, I realized the truth. Removing Karen hadn't erased the problem. It had only revealed it. The problem wasn't just one woman with a binder. The problem was power itself. HOA's promised protection, order, beauty. But the fine print hides something dangerous. The authority to dictate, to punish, to control. And when that authority falls into the wrong hands, into the hands of someone like Karen, it doesn't protect communities. It breaks them. I thought about my daughter Emily's question, "Are the police watching us?" At the time, I hadn't known how to answer. But now I understood that she had asked the wrong question. It wasn't about whether the police were watching. It was about whether we had allowed ourselves to live under constant watch, by Karen, by rules, by fear. One evening, weeks after the recall, I walked down the street alone. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of orange and red. Lawns were overgrown in patches. A few trash cans lingered on the curb. Someone had hung wind chimes that clattered gently in the breeze, an item Karen would have found in an instant. And yet it felt beautiful. Imperfect, yes. Messy. Human. I realized then that neighborhoods aren't meant to be perfect. They're meant to be lived in. They're meant to be noisy with kids' laughter, cluttered with birthday balloons, messy with life. Perfection is sterile. Control is suffocating. As I stood there, breathing in the imperfect peace, A thought struck me like lightning. Maybe the real question isn't how much power an HOA should have. Maybe the real question is how much of our freedom we're willing to surrender for the illusion of order. Because once you give it up, once you stay silent, once you let someone else decide what belongs and what doesn't, you may never get it back. That night, I tucked Emily into bed, kissed her forehead, and told her, "No, sweetheart. The police aren't watching us anymore. We're watching out for ourselves now." Her smile was small but steady. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. The rebellion hadn't just toppled a tyrant. It had reminded us that community isn't built on fines or rules, it's built on people and trust. On the messy, fragile, beautiful freedom to live without fear. And as I turned off her light, I asked myself the question that will haunt me for the rest of my life. If silence gave Karen her power, how many other neighborhoods, how many other families, are still living under someone just like her?